Okay. Well, welcome to the webinar, everyone. I am really glad all of you could join me during this busy holiday season. By now, the SYB webinars have become such a regular thing that sometimes I don't realize that I've only been doing them for about 9 months. And in fact, the very first webinar that I gave for SYB was in March. It was on this same topic, and it was really popular at the time. And in fact, all year long, 5G has been the most asked about topic we've had at SYB. So for the final webinar of 2020, I'm really happy to have the opportunity to get back to this topic with some fresh and updated information. So before we get into the meat here, I'm gonna, also quick note that there is a chat pod and there is a Q&A pod. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A pod. If they're in the chat, I won't see them, but the chat is enabled for all of you to chat if you'd like. Okay, so today's outline is first we'll do a really quick intro, then we'll get into the main content. And I've broken that into 4 sections. What is 5G? How is 5G regulated? What are the health risks of 5G and how to think about them? And of course, the most important part of the discussion, 5G safety and protection, concluding with a special product announcement. Then I'll get into Q&A, answering as many of your questions as possible. Again, you can use the Q&A pod to do that. And I know that some of you also pre-submitted some through Google Forms, so thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna turn off the camera while I get into the presentation. So very quickly about me, my name is R. Blank. I'm the CEO of Shield Your Body, formerly on the faculty of the University of Southern California Viterbi School of Engineering. Along with my father, Dr. Martin Blank, I co-authored Overpowered, which is all about the health effects, the science about the health effects of EMF. And this follows a 20-year career in software engineering. Okay, as I said, that was gonna be a really quick intro, and it was, just to give another minute or so for people to get into the room. So today, I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk with you about 5G. I don't have to say that 2020 has been a really kind of wild year for all of us, everyone on this webinar, everyone around the world. And it's been wild at SYB as well. And one of the most significant topics that we've been asked about the most has been 5G. And now, before I get into the meat of the webinar, I want to start with a quick definition. 5G is the 5th generation of cell phone networks. That's how it gets its name, 5G, 5th generation. So you see here on this slide, the history of cell phone technology. 1G, the very first cell phones used 1G, the first generation. Those were the analog phones that we see, those huge big bricks, first coming out in 1979. Then 12 years later, we got 2G, which brought text messaging. Then 7 years after that, we got 3G, which was really the first mobile internet. Then 4G came out 10 years after that in 2008, which really accelerated our use and literally accelerated it, sped up our internet connections from our phones. It made the web and email much more usable from our mobile devices. And then in 2019, although it really didn't, that's when it first came out, it didn't really start rolling out widely until this year, we got 5G. So that's what 5G literally means. It's the 5th generation of cell phone networks, and that's how it fits into the evolution of cell technology, which has been around now for quite over 40 years now. Now, all year, a lot of people I've talked to have assumed that 5G is essentially everywhere. Now, while the rollout really picked up a lot of speed this year, it is not everywhere. So far, it's focused in larger cities, generally in developed countries, but it's nowhere near ubiquitous yet. To get a pretty decent idea of where 5G is and if it's near you, just Google for the Ookla, O-O-K-L-A, 5G map. And you'll get this website. I have the URL on the screen as well. And you can search everywhere in the world, and it's zoomable, and you can go into like your area or where your parents or your kids live. Now, it's also important to understand that just because 5G is in your area, it doesn't mean that you have it. In fact, you probably don't have it. Still today, most phones don't support 5G. You need to go out of your way to get a 5G phone, and they still tend to be pretty expensive. So in order to actually have 5G, you need to have a 5G phone in an area that actually has 5G coverage. And since I still get a lot of questions about this, I want to point out that 5GE is not 5G. 5GE is a marketing gimmick from AT&T, one that was so misleading that they were sued over it by Verizon and settled for an undisclosed amount of money. 5GE is basically turbo boosted 5G. So if you see 5GE on your phone, you don't actually have 5G. Okay, so now that we know where 5G fits into the evolution of cell technology, to best understand what 5G really is, it's helpful to look at how 5G is actually different from 4G and older technologies. Wireless devices like cell phones use electromagnetic radiation, or EMF, to communicate. I have a whole separate webinar on that, so I don't want to get into too much detail here, but I am going to do a very quick explanation of this because a lot of people have heard the term 5G. A lot of people have heard the term EMF, but don't fully understand what it is, and it is really central to understanding 5G. EMF is a force, as its name suggests, that's made up from electricity and magnetism. That's how the term is electromagnetic field. It's made up of electricity and magnetism. Now, some EMF is natural, like sunlight. Visible light is a form of EMF. And the Earth has a magnetic field too, and lightning emits EMF, right? So that's all by way of saying there are some natural forms of EMF that have been around the planet since long before humans were here for the evolution of all life on Earth. For the first several billion years of life on Earth, those were essentially the only forms of EMF that existed. That is visible light, the Earth's magnetic field, and lightning. But then in the 19th century, as we harnessed the power of electricity, that began to change. So first, you formed the light bulb. Edison created the light bulb. Then they created the grid that powered the light bulb. The light bulb is a source of EMF. The power grid that powers the light bulb is a source of EMF. Once you had this grid in place, like a platform, they started building appliances that you could also run off of this grid. Each of those is a source of EMF. Then eventually they figured out that you could use EMF to communicate wirelessly. So you got radio, you got television, you got radar. And today, every device that runs on electricity and every device that communicates wirelessly emits this force. Now, there are different types of EMF, and those different types exist on a spectrum, what's known as the electromagnetic spectrum. And here we see a visualization of that spectrum that I made for the Overpowered book. And I'm showing it here to show you that there are different types of EMF, and they have different amounts of energy, which is to say they have different frequencies. Frequency here is measured in hertz. So just like a radio station might operate at a certain number of kilohertz, right? It's the same, or you have a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi router. That's what hertz is. And it's a measurement of how fast the frequency is of that signal. And that is how much energy that signal has. The further to the right that you go on this chart, the more energy the EMF has. So you see all the way at the right, you have gamma rays, which we all know are very dangerous. It's also X-rays, just a little bit to the left of that. And those have a tremendous amount of energy, so much that even a tiny little dose is really harmful. And in fact, can cause real damage and in some instances kill you. Then as you go to the left, right, you see you hit UV rays. Those are harmful. You want to minimize those, but they won't, kill you in an instant dose. Then you get visible light. Then below that, you have infrared, which has less energy than light. Then you have radio and microwave. And then all the way to the left, you have extremely low frequency, or ELF. And that's what you get from appliances and light bulbs and power lines. Now, so you see here this section called radio and microwave, the radio frequency and microwave range of EMF. That's what all wireless devices use to communicate. So you see here, you see Wi-Fi, cordless phones, radar, television, radio. But of course, we're talking today about 5G, and I'm trying here to compare it to 4G. So most existing cell phones use 4G or the fourth generation networks to communicate, still even today. In most countries, 4G phones communicate with frequencies between 600 megahertz to 6 gigahertz. So that's to give you kind of a sense of the whole spectrum of electromagnetic energy. Where does 5G fit into that? So for that, I'll bring up a different graphic, one that I got from the New York Times. Oh, and by the way, after this webinar, everyone who attended is you're gonna get an email from me that will contain a link to an ebook. All of this information, including things like this diagram, that are in the ebook and with links to the source. So here we see the electromagnetic spectrum, a segment on the left, you see the whole spectrum, except here it's vertical. On the last slide, it was horizontal. And on the bottom here, you see, I think you can see my cursor. There's extremely low frequency. That's the power lines. Then the blue segment here that's highlighted, that's the radio frequency, also microwave. Now that's expanded, it's exploded here on the right. So you can see here where it says there's existing cell phones. It's this whole band is existing cell phones. And here to the left in the darker blue, that's 5G. So what you can see is there's a little bit of overlap. So 5G and 4G, they overlap a bit, but then 5G goes way up here. And in fact, 5G, right now, it's using the same frequencies as 4G. So we're in this overlap. But 5G can and eventually will go up to 300 gigahertz. These are also called millimeter waves, which is a term you might have heard in the news or when you're browsing the web. That's what they mean by millimeter waves. They're talking about these much higher forms of energy that can go up to 300 gigahertz. And these frequencies have never before been used in consumer applications. So I said we're going to start this discussion by talking about how 5G is different. 5G is different. In the first difference I'm going to cover is that 5G uses much more energy than has ever been used in consumer technology. Now, while these frequencies haven't been used in consumer applications before, they actually have been used before, just not in consumer ones. And one pretty worrying example of how these are used is something called the active denial system. These are wireless weapons used by military to inflict pain without physical injury. So they project 95 gigahertz waves at, for instance, protesters to disable them because it inflicts so much pain. So now these, the active denial system and other microwave weaponry use a lot more power than a cell phone, but it is a clear demonstration of how these frequencies can impact health. But the fact that 5G has more energy is just the start of the differences. The next one is bandwidth, because the reason that 5G uses higher frequencies is to enable more bandwidth, right? We're all streaming so much more. We're all online so much more. We have more and more devices coming online. Things that weren't internet enabled just a few years ago are becoming internet enabled. All that means is we're all consuming so much more bandwidth. They need a network that can support all that bandwidth. And that's why 5G is engineered the way that it is. So 5G doesn't only operate with more energy than 4G, it's also designed to carry a lot more information. It's expected that average download speeds on 5G will be around 1 gigabit per second, which is really quite fast. For comparison, the average 4G download speed is 30 megabit, right? So 1 megabit versus 30 megabit. That means 5G is estimated to be almost 300 times faster than 4G, right? 300 times faster. All that speed means more power is required. And that power is used to send more data. And more data means more EMF because it's the EMF that's actually carrying the data. So you have more energy, you have more bandwidth. I hinted at this on the last slide, you have more devices. 5G is not just designed for a faster wireless experience. It's also designed from the ground up to connect many, many more devices. And this, I really think this is really critical to understanding the potential impact of 5G, because it's not just for phones. A lot of people think of 5G as a cell phone technology, and it is a cell phone technology, but it's much more than that. Pardon me, I have a fly in front of me. It's much more than that. It's cars and watches and homes and hospitals and the utility grid. In another of our recent webinars, this one just 2 months ago, our senior SYB EMF specialist, Kathy Cook, she was discussing a smart tampon, which is just what it sounds like. And that's it's not a joke. This product really exists. And it's a great illustration of how many things are being designed to take advantage of the new 5G infrastructure. So 5G is designed for a connected grid that has orders of magnitude more devices. And each one of these devices are new sources of EMF. The example of the smart tampon, that takes a device that never emitted any EMF at all, and it turns it into yet another source of EMF in our lives. Now, the fourth key difference I want to discuss is antennas, because 5G uses higher frequencies, as I mentioned, and those don't travel as far as lower frequencies like 4G. And as I mentioned, 5G is also designed for more devices connecting at much faster speeds. Because we have more devices and the signals don't travel as far and they're carrying more data, that means the 5G network requires many, many more antennas to function, a lot more. This is called network densification. And you'll start seeing these so-called small cells pop up in new places, like on the top of streetlights, like in this photo. This does not look like a 4G antenna. This is a 5G antenna. They're almost invisible. So we have more energy, more bandwidth, more devices, and more antennas. Those are the key differences between 5G and 4G and the prior generations of cell phone tech. And all of this combines for a massive leap in EMF exposures. And it's in a whole new segment of the EM spectrum that most of humanity has never before been exposed to. And that's what's really worrying, why so many people consider 5G to be so much more dangerous than prior generations of wireless technology. So, with all of this increased exposure to the population, how is 5G being regulated? The short answer is barely at all. There are different approaches to 5G regulation in the world, in different parts of the world. In the United States, 5G is regulated by the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, and it's being regulated in just the same way as 4G and all wireless devices since the 1990s have been. So even though this is a completely new technology, as I've explained it to you, leading to completely different sets of exposures, it's being regulated the same way. So what is that same way? How is this stuff regulated in the United States? In terms of human health, the FCC only cares about something called the thermal effect. Now, we all know that if there's enough EMF radiation, it can heat and burn and cook. That's exactly how a microwave oven works. And so there's a point at which there's so much EMF that it actually burns you or heats your skin. That heat causes damage that not only hurts your skin, it can damage cells, it can cause cellular mutations, it can kill cells. So that's the level that you're not allowed to sell a device, right? A phone, you can't sell a phone that exceeds the level that triggers the thermal effect. So if a device doesn't burn you, it's okay to sell to you. That's not an exaggeration, that is true. But as I'm about to discuss, science has demonstrated a massive range of negative health effects from exposure to EMF at power levels much lower than what are covered by the thermal effect. But that doesn't even cover the scope of the risks, because all of these regulations are effectively self-regulated. For example, cell phones can only emit a certain amount of EMF. But who tests that? The cell phone companies do. Same for towers. Towers can only emit a certain amount of EMF. But who tests for that? The companies that install and run the towers. Yes, they have to report the results to the government, but because this is all self-tested, you have a ton of room for cheating. And I have more information about that on my website. If you just click on Learn and then EMF regulations, you'll see I have a whole section about this and how in certain instances they've actually been able to uncover this cheating and see that cell phones have been released onto the market that emit far more radiation than is legally allowed. Now, before we move on to the health effects, I did want to note that not everywhere has taken the same regulatory approach as the United States. As one example, the government of Brussels, which is the capital of Belgium and the seat of the European Parliament, indefinitely ceased the rollout of 5G when the wireless companies could not say how much radiation people were exposed to. And there are dozens of other municipalities and governments around the world that have suspended or restricted the 5G rollout or initiated investigations and research to begin that process. And I have links to information about this in the ebook that you'll be getting after this. And I point this out because I've been involved in EMF for almost a decade, and I was exposed to this world through my father, who'd been involved for 30 years before that. And when I started SYB, most people just weren't that worried. Sure, there have been, some worries about cell phones and cancer going back to the 90s, but in general, it was a fringe concern and not getting much attention. But with the 5G situation, it's really different. And not only are you seeing more and more people like you who are taking the time to attend this webinar, getting worried and taking action and talking to other people about what they're learning, but you're also finally starting to see governments take action. Now, not enough to stop the rollout around the world, but really it's a big difference from how this stuff has gone in the past. So what is everyone so worried about? Well, traditionally, the wireless industry rolls out new technology without performing studies into the long-term health impact. Those studies come later, after the technology has already been released. This is critical to understand. They don't test this stuff for safety before it's released. Scientists study it and the health effects after it's released. This was the case with the first cell phones, with Wi-Fi, with 4G, and now we're seeing it's the case again with 5G. This is why cell phones are referred to as the largest biological experiment ever by Dr. Leif Salford, and many agree. Because when the technology isn't tested for health and safety before it's released, the release is the actual test. We are the guinea pigs. Despite the absence of health studies into the long-term health effects of 5G, Dr. Joel Moskowitz from the UC Berkeley School of Public Health has explained, we have no reason to believe that 5G is safe. And that's really the standard that should be applied. For decades, the wireless industry has demanded that there is no definitive proof. That's a real key word for them. There's no definitive proof that EMF is bad for you and your health. Now, the use of the phrase definitive proof is really misleading and is basically used to hijack and derail the discussion. I have a whole post about that actually on my blog, but that's not the point, because the burden should not be on us to prove that this stuff is dangerous, much less to prove it definitively. The burden should be on the wireless companies to prove that this stuff is safe, and they haven't, because as I've said, there's been no long-term testing into the health effects of 5G exposures. There could not have been. This technology is all brand new. It is by definition being released untested. But it is possible to make some educated guesses based on what we already know about the negative health effects of EMF exposure from prior and current generations of wireless technology. EMF exposure from devices like cell phones has been linked to a wide range of negative health effects in humans, right? So we all, probably all of us, know about the really terrifying ones like brain tumors, but the effects really span every system in our body and varying degrees of severity. So obviously, brain tumors are terrifying, but infertility, that's also quite worrying for a lot of people, but somehow maybe a little less worrying than a brain tumor. But infertility, even lower on the scale, is sleep disruption. This year, I think it's gotten a little more attention that there are several studies indicating that exposure to EMF radiation suppresses your immune system. Exposure in utero, that is, if a fetus is exposed in a pregnant mother, that has been linked to outcomes like, pardon me, I'm stumbling on the word, poorer academic performance, and even asthma and obesity by the time a child is 13 years old. You see it in reduced grades and negative impact on memory. And if you're interested in learning more and seeing specific citations of studies, I have a page on my website that covers a lot of this. You just go to Learn EMF Health Effects. That's what you see here in the screenshot. Now, I do really want to highlight that the health effects that we see from EMF are documented throughout almost every system in our body. And this is not, at first this can seem surprising. Why does this impact every part of our body? I mean, if you smoke, it only hurts your lungs. Why does this impact every part of our body? And there are a couple of reasons. And again, I go into them in a post that you can find on that page. But obviously, every part of our body has cells. And there is a lot of research demonstrating, including studies that my father did, demonstrating that EMF affects cells. It directly impacts DNA. It can lead to strand breaks. It can lead to cellular mutations, genetic mutations. It can lead to cellular death. Even at lower doses that don't have those immediate impacts, you can see that it's something called the stress response is invoked by exposure to EMF. So even super low doses, your body is interpreting this as a risk. It's interpreting it as a potential damage. And every part of our body has these cells. They all share these same cellular mechanisms. And we're exposed to EMF in every part of our body. Now, sometimes it surprises people to hear that there are literally tens of thousands of studies into the negative health effects from exposure to EMF and cell phone radiation. And it surprises people because you'll often hear this presented on the news like it's a debate, like the jury's still out, but it isn't. It really, really isn't. For a top level overview of the science landscape, I'll point you to the Bioinitiative report, for which my father was an author, one of the authors, which is a survey of thousands of these studies. This report, in which it has a single page that you can read, you go to bioinitiative.org, click on conclusions. They review all of these studies and summarize the various health effects that are consistently reported at different doses. And this is key. Doses that are far below what current safety standards permit. All of this science demonstrates negative health effects at really, really low doses of EMF. Doses far below what a single cell phone emits. Now, I want to highlight that because when we're talking about 5G, we're talking about much more than a single cell phone. We're talking about an environment with ubiquitous, densely packed sources of EMF. There's one other aspect of the science that that's been clearly demonstrated that I really want to cover, which is the existence of a dose-response relationship. A dose-response relationship means the stronger the dose you receive, the more of a response that you get. Just like the more alcohol that you drink, the more drunk you get. That's a dose-response relationship. And a really large body of EMF science shows a dose-response relationship between your EMF exposure and the negative health outcomes. So for example, the longer you talk on your phone with it up to your head, cumulatively, right, the more and more hours that you do that, the higher your risk of developing a brain tumor. And that brings me to what I believe is the most fundamental flaw in EMF safety standards, like cell phone emissions guidelines. Even if these standards were sufficient to protect your health from EMF, they're designed to protect you from a single source. The standards say how much radiation a single cell phone can give off, or how much a single Wi-Fi router can emit, but we're never exposed to radiation from a single source anymore. We're surrounded by cell phones and Wi-Fi networks and computers and baby monitors and smart meters and power lines and kitchen appliances. We're surrounded by this stuff 24/7. When you actually think about it, it's completely insane how this stuff is regulated. The FCC acts like being exposed to radiation from a single cell phone for 10 minutes and being exposed to radiation for hundreds of cell phones for 4 hours or 4 days or 4 weeks carries the same risk to your health. But that makes no sense. Obviously, the more sources of this stuff there are that you're exposed to, the greater the risk to your health will be. But that's not how this stuff is regulated. It's only regulated that a single cell phone can't emit so much EMF that it heats you and burns you. So, safety standards and regulations for EMF ignore the real measurable negative health effects that occur at levels lower than safety standards permit and lower than the thermal effect. They ignore that we're exposed to these unhealthy levels of EMF from numerous sources simultaneously over the course of our lives and not just a single moment in time. So what does that mean for 5G? Well, that brings us back to one of the basic design elements of 5G, supporting more devices with more antennas. Everything in the world is converting to being smart. Everything in the world is converting to being connected. Everything then becomes a source of EMF. And this is in addition to the EMF that we're all already exposed to. So 5G means an order of magnitude explosion in the number of sources of EMF in our lives, and thus an order of magnitude explosion in the amount of radiation we're exposed to all the time. And since we know that EMF has a dose-response relationship with health risks, exploding the number of sources means exploding the increase in the risk to our health. And that's before you consider the fact that 5G will be operating at a whole new set of frequencies. So let's take a second and look back at the frequencies. Remember this slide? I used it earlier to show you how 5G will use newer frequencies with more energy. As I discussed, right, while the initial deployment, I think again, you can see my mouse, the initial deployments here will overlap with 4G. In the future, they're going to go up and up and up into the millimeter waves. Now, I want to be clear, we don't know exactly what this change in energy will mean to us in terms of public health, because there hasn't really been very much testing on this, which is, again, why it's so completely irresponsible to roll it out this way. But in addition to what we already know about the types of impact that EMF has on the human body, there is one aspect of millimeter waves that has been demonstrated. And that is the fact that according to one study, these millimeter waves interact with our body in a different way than, for instance, 4G EMF waves. This study found that human sweat ducts act as an array of tiny helix-shaped antennas when exposed to millimeter waves, which suggests that human skin not only absorbs millimeter waves, but actually amplifies the radiation. And this suggests that the impact of 5G radiations may be amplified as well. Now, this is just one study. I'd link to it from the ebook that you'll be getting after this webinar, so you can read up on it further. And it's a great example of the types of surprises that lay ahead, because the wireless industry is rolling this out without long-term testing. Now we get to what I think is the most important part. Pardon me, I'm just going to take a quick sip of water. And that's what you can do to live more safely in the face of what is happening with 5G. Now, before I get to what you can do at the personal level, I want to address some of the easiest ways to make a bigger difference in the fight against 5G. So first is to learn, like what you're doing right now by attending this webinar. Learn as much as you can about what 5G is, what it isn't, because there is a lot of misinformation out there from both sides or rather from all sides of the discussion online. So you want to learn as much of what the real science is telling us and learn as much about the real state of the deployments that are out there in the world right now. And attending this webinar is a great start. The more that you know, the more educated you will be about what 5G is and what you can do about it. As you learn more about 5G and how it is being rolled out in your region, share that what you learned with your friends, family, and colleagues. Odds are increasing that they've heard some pretty worrying things about 5G, but they don't understand the issues like you do. Maybe they also think that some of it's crazy stuff, and because there has been a lot of crazy stuff said about 5G, particularly this year, and that makes it easier for skeptics to dismiss the real concerns. So what you want to do is talk to the people in your life, people that you care about, people that you're friends with, your family, your loved ones. You don't want to browbeat them. Instead, let them know what this technology really is, what science says it can do to them and their loved ones, and what they can do about it. And in fact, I spent a big chunk of this year developing materials specifically designed to help people like you talk about these issues more productively. So if you just visit shieldyourbody.com/advocacy, you'll see there's ebooks, there's resource materials, there's videos, there's actually a 20-minute video course on the best ways I found to talk about these issues with people. And so I really encourage you to talk to people, but also to put in a little time to learn how to talk to people, because you want to talk to them in a way that gets them engaged and gets them understanding the issues in a way that they want to at least do something and not dismiss all of this knowledge. Next, contacting local officials. This is the best way to oppose the rollout of 5G is at the local level. The federal government is not going to do anything about it, not anytime soon, not until there's more localities that are doing something about it. So you contact your local officials like your mayor, your city council, your county council to express your opposition and learn more about the status of the 5G rollout in your area. In the ebook I'm sending after this webinar, there is a link to a sample letter you can use when contacting government officials about your worries about 5G and its deployment. Now, this one, I think, is actually the most important. I mean, I think learning to talk about it's also really important. Not just the willingness to talk about it, but to really learn how to talk about it in ways that are effective. But step 4 is to boycott. And boycott makes it sound perhaps a little more political than I intended to, but just don't buy this stuff, right? As more and more 5G things come out, don't buy it. Don't buy the 5G phone. Don't buy the 5G thermostat. Don't buy the wireless tampon. Don't buy this tech that you don't need and isn't important to your life, doesn't add value to your life, and it just fuels the market for 5G tech. The fewer people that buy 5G devices, the slower it will roll out. It doesn't stop the rollout, it slows it down. But that makes a big difference. So vote with your wallet. This is a really powerful tactic. And it's one, even better, it saves you money because you're not buying something. So, but it really is a powerful, if fewer and fewer people are buying this stuff, it will just roll out that much more slowly. So that's what you could do at kind of a broader level. Now, what can you do at a personal level? Well, the first thing to remember is that while 5G is a new and untested type of EMF, it is still a type of EMF. That means it behaves like EMF, which means a lot of the same ways you protect yourself from EMF also work on 5G. So even if 5G is installed in your city, even if you can detect dozens of networks around you, and even if you live in an area that's extremely polluted by 5G, what you do with your own devices and in your own home matters a lot. So developing some of the habits that can drastically reduce your exposure to EMF can really help. Habits like these are completely free and the best way to reduce your exposure to 5G and EMF. And it comes down to what my father called the 2 key rules. The first is to minimize your use. Oh, I flipped the images. I'm sorry. Minimize your use is on the right, maximize the distance is on the left. So the 2 key rules are minimize and maximize. You want to minimize your use of 5G generating technology, and you want to maximize the distance between your body and the tech when it is in use. There are a lot of easy ways to do this without sacrificing your enjoyment of tech, and that's what I'm going to get into a couple of them right now. So minimizing use. Minimizing your use of this tech is obviously the best way to cut your exposure, right? If you don't have the Wi-Fi on in your house, you're not going to get that exposure. You don't have to protect yourself from it, right? Because you're cutting it out at the source. So obviously, you know, there are people who do give up cell phones completely. There are people who switch their houses fully over to Ethernet. In my experience, not everyone is willing to do that, but there are still ways that you can make big differences in those exposures. So for example, do not sleep with your cell phone, or if you do, turn it into airplane mode. If you sleep with your phone, you're being exposed to cell phone radiation all night long when you're not even using the phone. And this is during your sleep, and which is meant to be restful, regenerative. It's very important to have high quality sleep for your health. This type of radiation disrupts your sleep. So you don't bring your phone to bed or turn it into airplane mode if you do. Next is to put your phone into airplane mode, even if you're not sleeping, but when you're not using your phone. Airplane mode on your phone was originally created for when you're flying in a plane, but we all know you don't need to fly to use it. And when your phone is in airplane mode, you virtually eliminated its EMF radiation. So you don't need, when you don't need to make or receive calls and texts, turn on airplane mode. You can still do all sorts of things on your phone if you need it, right? You can use it as a clock, as an alarm clock. A bunch of games are still probably playable. Ebooks that you've downloaded, podcasts that you've downloaded, you can listen to them. Your phone still serves a lot of purposes in airplane mode, but you almost entirely cut off the EMF. Now, those are examples of ways to minimize use. The next is maximizing distance. Now, minimizing use is the best way, right? Because then you're cutting off the exposure. If you turn off your phone, if you get rid of Wi-Fi, you don't have that exposure in the first place. But if you are using these technologies, the next best thing you can do is to maximize the distance. And the reason this matters so much is because the power of EMF radiation diminishes exponentially with distance. That means each time you double the distance between your body and your technology, you're slashing the power by 75%. So even standing, if you're right, this is why you're not supposed to stand next to your microwave oven. You shouldn't. I mean, I'm not going to judge, but you shouldn't be using a microwave oven to begin with. But even if you do use it, if you're standing right next to it, right, you're getting a huge dose from that microwave oven. If you stand even 6 feet away, you've made a huge reduction in what your exposure is. Better yet, if you're standing in the other room when your microwave oven is on, you've made an even bigger difference. Distance really matters with this stuff. So you want to be as far away from the source of EMF when it's in use as possible. So one example of that is to not carry your phone in your pocket. When your phone is directly against your body, it is likely one of your biggest, if not the biggest, sources of your EMF exposure. Even many cell phone companies, including Apple, tell you not to carry your phone in your pocket, because if you do, your exposure can exceed legal limits. But everyone does this. I see people do it all the time. I see it in movies and TV all the time. And to me, it's more jarring at this point than seeing people smoke, because the anti-smoking lobby has had such success that I know when I see someone smoke in a movie, it's really meant to tell me this character's really scummy. You know, it's meant as an artistic point. But when I see people put their phones in their pockets, it's just thoughtless. It's just like, oh, that's where you put a phone. And it really bothers me. And the same is true, by the way, for women with bras. I see this done all the time, especially at gyms. Women put their phones in their sports bras. When it's right in your pocket or in your bra, you're getting a really big dose. And so you might ask, where can you carry it? Well, if you have to carry it in your pocket or in your bra, turn it into airplane mode. It really makes a huge difference in your exposure. So another example is to never hold your phone up against your head. I never ever do this. No one in my life, because this is one of those lessons that I've really been able to hit home with everyone that I care about. Never hold the phone up to your head. Always use speakerphone or text instead of call, or use a headset, preferably an anti-radiation headset. And it's for the same reason. When you're holding the phone right up to your head, it's directly against your body. Not only is it directly against your body, it's really close to your brain in a part of your head that doesn't have the skull to protect it, because the ear canal doesn't have a skull between the phone and your brain. And of course, if you're talking on the phone, that means your phone is broadcasting. And so it's an even bigger source of EMF than when you're just carrying it in your pocket. So these are examples of a few ways that you can reduce your exposure to EMF for free starting right now and without buying any new gadgets. And they work on 5G just like they work on earlier versions of this stuff. It's the same information that I've been sharing for years, because these are the two key rules, and they work on all EMF generating technology: minimize and maximize. Minimize your use of EMF tech and maximize the distance between your body and the tech when you do use it. But no matter how many of these tips that you adopt, if you want to participate in the modern world, you're still going to be exposed to EMF and 5G radiation. That's just what the world is like today, and the amount of EMF in the environment is going to keep growing. And that's where good 5G protection products come in. The type of products that can protect you against EMF in the environment, right? It's one thing to tell you, don't carry your phone in your pocket, but what are you going to do about that cell tower that went up down the block? That's not in your direct control. So you need solutions to help protect you against these sources that are not in your direct control, because there are more and more of these sources of EMF and 5G in the environment every day. Now, I've been making EMF protection products for several years, long before the 5G rollout began. This means that I didn't test 5G frequencies when we performed our EMF testing on our products. There was no need. But because of 5G, in 2019, I started testing any new product. So any product I started launching from the second half, from basically about a year ago, 13 months ago, we started testing all of them on 5G frequencies. And then throughout this year, I went back and I've had almost my entire catalog retested against 5G, even the products I released 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And the results are quite impressive. You can read more about them on my website. But the answer is, yes, my products do provide 5G protection. Now, this includes products like my phone pouch, my phone shield, and the hard headset adapter. These are now all 5G tested. But it's not just the accessories. It's also the apparel, like my bandana, my boxers, and my baby blanket. And I really increasingly feel it's really important. The apparel products are really important, because things like my phone pouch and the hard and the air tubes and all of these products, they're good, they work, they're important, but they're also helping to protect you against sources of EMF that are in your control. The apparel is really the only type of solution that can protect you from sources that are not in your direct control, from like your neighbor's Wi-Fi or a nearby cell tower or your neighbor's smart meter. EMF-proof apparel is an increasingly important part of your protection arsenal. So that brings me to the special announcement I have for you, because I promised that I'd be making a special product announcement. It's my latest 5G protection product. This is actually the final product that I am launching this year. And I want you all to know that you are the very first people in the world that I am telling this to. I also want you to know that I'm really excited about this one, because it's really well designed. It looks really good, and it's so useful. It can be used in a lot of different ways. And because it's yet another product in my catalog that can help protect you, from sources that are outside of your control, right? This product does that. And because you're attending this webinar, all of you are going to get a special discount on it too. Okay, So you're probably like, enough already. What is it? Okay, so are you ready? Is everyone ready? I think, okay, good. So I would like to introduce you to the SYB neck gator. Now, some of you may not know the term neck gator. So let me explain. A neck gator is the name for what some people call a buff or a neck tube. It's a type of fabric that's designed to be worn dozens of different ways. You can wear it as a headband, as a beanie, as a scarf, as a face mask, as a balaclava. You can wear it literally dozens of different ways. And of course, because it's 2020, I would also note it can be used as a face mask, which a lot of us are wearing these days. And because it's so flexible, it's great for both kids and adults. It's a true one-size-fits-all product, and it's a great unisex design. It looks great on men, it looks great on women, girls and boys. Anyone can use it. However you'd use a normal neck gaiter, except mine has the added superpower of EMF and 5G protection. And just to be clear, it protects the part of your body that it's covering. So if you wear it on your head, it's protecting your head. If you wear it around your neck, it's protecting your thyroid. And I do mean powerful protection. If you look at the test data, again, which is posted on my website, but summarized here on this slide, it has over 99% shielding effectiveness at every frequency. And as you can see, for this product, I had it tested up to 40 gigahertz. How do I get such powerful shielding protection? By making it from 90% silver. That's right, it's 90% silver. The other 10% is spandex, which is what gives it the elasticity and flexibility that you need to use it as a gaiter. Now, of course, because it's made from so much silver, it's not an inexpensive product to make. So we're selling it for $89, and it is worth every dollar. But because you are here in my webinar to help me celebrate this latest product, this last product launch of 2020, I'm going to give you a big discount, a really big discount. So you just enter NECK25 at checkout to save 25% on the neck gaiter. So not only can you be one of the first people in the world to own and enjoy the SYB neck gaiter, but you can get it for a one-time price that everyone can be jealous of. I also want to highlight, for those of you who don't already know, any order of products from my website includes free shipping, a lifetime warranty, and 30-day returns. It's a really risk-free decision, and I'm making it really easy for you to get some incredibly functional, super stylish, very powerful lab-tested 5G protection for your head and neck. Now, before I wind up and get into the Q&A, I wanted to remind you that all of you will get a copy of my ebook, 5G Safety and Protection. It'll arrive in your inbox after this webinar is completed, so keep an eye out. So remember, this offer expires as soon as the webinar ends. Not tomorrow, not later tonight. As soon as the webinar ends, so does this coupon. So if you're interested, you're going to want to act now. So you just go to shieldyourbody.com/neck, add it to your cart, go to checkout, put in the code NECK25, and 25% will be taken off your order. Okay, so now I will get into the Q&A. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I have to load up the pod. This is my first Zoom webinar, everyone, so I appreciate you having the patience and coming back to me. Let's see. What is a safe distance? Oh, this is okay. So Kristen asks, oh, I think I can click this button. Kristen asks, what is a safe distance between a 5G tower and a house? I live in Windsor, Canada, and Detroit has 3 towers. You know, that's a great question. And it's not as super easy. I wish I had, you know, I wish I could tell you, you know, it's a mile or it's 4 miles. There is no clean answer to this. The answer is the further away, the better, right? Because every additional amount of EMF that you're exposed to is going to increase the risks of forming some of these health outcomes that we see documented by science. Now, I also want to be clear, right? I'm not trying to tell everyone that because of 5G, everyone's going to get brain tumors. Yes, there are people who form brain tumors from exposure to cell phone radiation and Wi-Fi radiation and so forth. But just because some people do doesn't mean everyone will, but it also, just because, you know, you don't form a brain tumor doesn't mean it's not impacting your body. It doesn't mean it's not disrupting your sleep. It doesn't mean it's not giving you anxiety, right? So there's a whole wide, as I touched on earlier in the webinar, there's this wide array of potential health effects that have been documented from these things. And they're not all the most terrifying ones, but they all really do impact your health. Now, the other part of that answer, Kristen, that I would give you is I would encourage you to learn how to test. And I have a part of my website. If you go to shieldyourbody.com/test, there's a bunch of information there about testing. There's an ebook where I recommend some meters that you can buy. Not from me, I don't sell meters, but I do recommend some others. And figure out what your exposure is in your environment. Just the 5G towers that are 4 miles away may not be the biggest sources in your environment. It may turn out that the power lines in front of your house are bigger. And so the real goal is trying to figure out where your biggest sources of exposure are coming from and what you can do to address those. Thank you, Kristen. Okay, so I'm going to, oh, Stephanie, I see you answered Martina in the chat. The air tube headset can be used with a USB-C adapter or a lightning adapter. But the air tubes and the heart only come in 3.5 millimeter, but they both work with USB-C adapters, so you can convert them for Android. Okay, I'm gonna jump over quickly here to some of the people. Beck asks if we ship to the UK. Yes, we do. Heather asks, oh, I shouldn't be indulging people typing into the chat because some people typed into the Q&A, which is where if you have questions, please type them there. But that is, Heather has a really good question here, which is how does the neck gator work? Does it reflect? Yes, every product I make and sell, with the exception of my headset product. So other than the headset products, every product I make and sell, whether it's the foam pouch, the baby blanket, or the neck gator, or the sling bag, any product in my catalog, it's made with shielding material. And what shielding material is it deflects EMF radiation. And I have an explanation on my website about how this works. If you go to shieldyourbody.com and then you look under the About menu, and it says, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to load it up to get the exact wording. It's how it works. It's the second item under the About menu. And it explains this technology is about 200 years old since Michael Faraday invented the Faraday cage. And he showed that you can use certain formations of metal or metal fibers to deflect radiation away from, in this case, from your body. So all of my products are EMF shielding products, and they all work by deflecting radiation in the opposite direction. Okay, so let me, let's see. How do we ensure textiles made? This is a question submitted in advance. Some of you submitted, because the emails I send out submitted questions in advance. How do we ensure textiles made from 100% silver microfibers protect us from EMF? So how do you, that's a good question. How do you ensure that anything protects you against EMF, that anything works the way that for instance, I say my Gator works? The only way you can be sure, I publish test results. These are independent test results from labs, but other companies do that too. I still say the only way to know for yourself. Okay, I'm seeing a little pushback here. I'm cutting, boy, Zoom has so many windows open. Okay, I see a little pushback here from Harriet and from Natalie. Okay, so I will let the coupon run for an hour after the webinar. But as Kristen said, you don't actually have to leave the webinar. You can go into another window, but I will leave the coupon valid. I'll make the change so it lasts for an hour after the webinar. So you have a chance to get your to get your Gator and still fully pay attention to the Q&A. Okay, so getting back to the question, how do we ensure that textiles made from silver protect us from EMF? How do you ensure that anything protects you from EMF the way the manufacturer claims? The only way that you can know is to test. And I'm a big advocate of that. And that's why I have a lot. If you go to shieldyourbody.com/test, you'll see there's blog posts, there's ebooks, there's videos, there's meter recommendations, there's explanations of how to do this stuff. I'm a really big advocate of this. Actually, hold on. I should have had it next to me, but give me a second. So I can't actually see what's on camera or not, but this is one of the meters that I really recommend. It's a tri-field TF2. I think it retails now maybe for about $180, and you really need to spend at least $160, $180 to get a decent meter, because if you're spending less than that, the meter is probably not going to be very good. But once you have a meter like this, you just turn it on and you can take levels. And again, my ebook tells you, gives you guidelines for what safety limits are, what the Building Biology Institute says safety limits should be, what you should be targeting. And it's also how you can tell if your protection is working. So if you take the phone pouch, for example, right, you would measure the phone alone, and then you'd put the phone in the phone pouch, and you'd take another measurement, and you'd see, is the measurement cut down? And that's really the only way, other than trusting, which a lot of people do, but I still encourage everyone to test, and that's really the only way that you can know if your EMF protection is working. Next question that was submitted here: is there another G after 5G that will be coming out soon? Whether it's soon or not, I can't say. If you remember that chart I had at the start of the presentation, there's a new G about every 10 years. I have read that they are working on 6G. I don't actually know what 6G entails. And at this point in the development, they probably aren't sure themselves. But yes, there will almost certainly be another G, whether it takes 10 years or maybe this time it comes out in 5 or 6. I can't, I don't know yet, but there definitely will be. Do any shielding products to sleep in need earthing? The community seems to be undecided on this. We have a sleeping bag from another company. I actually sleep less well in it. Okay, that is a really good question. We actually had a pretty big discussion on this. This is an ongoing discussion that we're having, but it came up in one of the last webinars that Kathy gave for us. And, one of the big worries about earthing is, oh, I'm pointing, you can't see what I'm pointing to, but when you're earthing, and most people, when they do earthing or grounding, they're earthing or grounding into a power outlet. And when you do that into a power outlet, you're connecting to the grid, which means that there's, yes, you can be earthing in the direction towards the grid, but you're also conducting things like dirty electricity from the grid to the product that you're earthing or grounding. And that right now, that's why I am a big advocate of earthing with the earth. So if you can walk barefoot on the beach or barefoot in the forest, or you actually, if you are able to run the grounding cord out your window and earth into the ground, those are all good. If you can ground or earth into the earth itself, I'm an advocate of that. Other than that, I have too many questions about what I brought up before in terms of the bidirectional flow of dirty electricity and issues like that. Kana asks, can a person sleep in this Gator? Yes, you certainly can. Let's see, another question submitted in advance. Since living in Vegas for about 6 weeks, I see 5G towers everywhere. I get head buzzing and chest pain, especially in both ear pain in both ear canals. This gets worse in heavy traffic, and it's horrible if I go to the strip, but goes away when hiking in the desert. This is and has been absolute hell. I don't know what to do and where to go. Well, those, you know, I obviously, well, I'm not a doctor, and even if I were, I couldn't give a diagnosis over, you know, a text question that was submitted. But I can say these symptoms are similar to ones that other people report who have what's known as sensitivity, electrical sensitivity, or electromagnetic hypersensitivity, also sometimes called EHS. And I do have a post on my site about that. You know, really, there are some institutes and location doctors and hospitals, a growing number, still small, that actually treat EHS. But the best thing you can do is to cut down these exposures in the first place. And you know, it's a growing number of people who are reporting these symptoms. And for some people, they can be really debilitating. And I really feel very, very a great deal of sympathy because you know, I've heard from so many people who have these symptoms, and they, you know, some of them have to retire and move to the middle of nowhere just in order to basically endure day to day. I do know that there are some, like I said, you know, the Women's College in Toronto is one. I have some posted on the website. I didn't memorize them. That do specialize in treating EHS. One thing I can say though is it is my experience that cutting out EMF anywhere will reduce your EHS symptoms everywhere. So for example, what I mean by that is, you know, let's say, like you said, it gets worse when you go to the Vegas Strip. And that makes sense because there's a lot more EMF at the Strip. And there's not much you can do about the EMF at the Strip, right? But at home, you can cut out EMF at home. So even though it's not at home where you have the worst symptoms, if you're cutting out the EMF exposure at home, that can, in some instances, reduce your symptoms in the places where you do have the worst reactions. Okay, let's see. Linda asks, what can be done to protect pets and wildlife? Well, those are two different questions. So it gets back to the fact is, you know, obviously in this webinar and a lot of my webinars, I talk a lot about the human impact of EMF. But the fact is EMF impacts all living things. It's not just humans, it's also other animals, it's also insects, it's also nature, sorry, not birds, trees and bushes and algae. Remember I was describing to you earlier why EMF can impact so many different parts of our body. It's because it impacts the cell and it impacts DNA. Well, that's that basic building block of life is shared by all life. So EMF has these impacts on nature. If you go to that page I mentioned on my website, the EMF health effects, it talks about, I do have a post about nature in particular, but when you come back to pets and wildlife, right, those are the two questions there. The pets are domesticated, the wildlife are out in the wild. So if you wanted to protect your pets, that's at home, that's in your control. So, you know, we do have some people who use the baby blanket to shield their pets at home, for example, or the bandana. Wildlife is different, right? Because that's out in the wild, and you know you're not going to buy them a neck gaiter. So that's when it comes back to the more advocacy tactics that I was discussing, which is learning how to talk about this, getting your neighbors on board with the understanding these issues and wanting to do something about these issues. And then, you know, wherever the sources of the, let's say they're trying to put up a new tower in a forest or in a park, you know, getting people on board to oppose that through your advocacy work. That's the only way that I know of to protect wildlife. But protecting pets, that's just like protecting a child, which is, you know, using the same, you know, turning off Wi-Fi at night or getting rid of it completely, you know, not using a microwave oven. That'll protect your pets just like it protects you. And then also shielding products work on pets as well. Thank you. Susan asks, what are the top 3 choices we can make to protect ourselves and our families. Okay, well, not to overcomplicate it, that answer is going to be different for everyone, right? Because people's exposures are different. They live in different areas. They have different lifestyles. But that said, it really, if I had to come up with the most generally applicable rule that I have found, it is always about cell phones. Don't carry your phone in your pocket. Or your bra. Let's keep that as one rule. Don't carry your phone right up against your body. Don't sleep with your phone, and turn your phone into airplane mode when you're not using it. Because again, I talk here in this webinar, I talk about all of these sources of EMF around us. You turn on Wi-Fi in your computer if you're in a city. Fortunately, right now I'm not. But if you were in a city, you turn on Wi-Fi, you see 50 Wi-Fi networks. And you're like, oh my, what am I going to do? How do I protect myself against all these Wi-Fi? And these are real issues. But my point is, even given the exploding number of sources that are in our lives, it's this device for so many people is the biggest source. Because these are really powerful sources, and we're with them all the time, right? And when I say, I mean, they have to transmit signals miles. They have to be able to transmit miles in order to make a cell phone call. And everyone has them, and they're on almost all the time. And so many people have bad cell phone hygiene. They're carrying it in their pocket when they shouldn't. They're sleeping with it. And because it's so close to your body, when you do these things, the dosage is really, really high. So the top 3 things that I would say were those: don't carry your phone in your pocket or bra, you put it in airplane mode when you don't need it on, and don't sleep with it. Kathy, Kathy's in the room. Hi, Kathy. Kathy points out that silver is naturally antibacterial, so that's an added bonus. Yes, thank you, Kathy. That's true. I should have mentioned that. And all of our apparel products use silver as the shielding metal. So that's why you'll see silver in not just in our Gator, but in our bandana, in the pocket patch, in the men's boxers, and so forth. But hi, Kathy. I didn't see you. Nice to see you. Most materials have a smell. Is there a smell with the neck head shield? There shouldn't be. I've learned in my years of working EMF, a lot of my customers have sensitivities that the average person doesn't have. And so some customers sometimes will come, this has been particularly true with the flex shields over the years. And so some customers find that they need to air them out for a day or two. But the silver, we've never had that feedback about any of our silver-based product, which, like I was just saying, are apparel-based products. So there really shouldn't be, Susan. We've never had that feedback on any of our apparel. Thank you. Mary asks, how do we know that these are working? Again, I would, here, let me just show, unfortunately, I'm sharing my really small screen, so I don't know how this is going to work, but give me a second. I'll see if I can bring this over. No, hold on. Okay, I have to go out of this and go into here. So, because the window is so small, you're seeing the mobile menu. But it's the same menu on desktop and mobile, just looks a little different. So you go to Learn, and then you go to EMF Testing. And that brings up this page. And this page has the ebook that you can download. That ebook explains how to do testing. It has meter recommendations. I have a blog post, infographic, and a video explaining how to do this. There's links to my own product testing that I've done. So it's all at shieldyourbody.com/test. I consider anyone who has worries about EMF, anyone who wants to minimize their EMF, anyone who wants to cut the EMF and protect themselves and their family from EMF, testing is a critical skill to have. And I know that, spending $180 on a meter it's not nothing. But when these issues are important to you, this is the only way to know for sure how much EMF you're being exposed to. And that's when you have the information. It can be, it can be as simple, right? A simple example is, you can take measurements in your living room and you can realize that if you just moved your couch 5 feet over towards a different wall, like the levels are completely different and you don't have to move. And just moving your couch or your chair a few feet, because you spend a lot of time on the couch or in your chair, can make a really big difference in your exposure. But you wouldn't know that unless you tested, because this stuff is invisible. And so if EMF matters to you, you want to test. And the only way to know if a product like the ones I sell are working is also to test. So I am a big, big advocate of learning how to test and getting the right equipment. Okay, go back to the slides. Yeah, cool. Okay, let's see where we are here. Jenny asks, what about shiny silver material? Would that help if we cannot get your mask? It depends if it's actually, if it's designed to shielding, because it's not just enough that it's silver. It has to be woven in the right way in order to form, to get that Faraday shielding effect. And then, so I know that mine works, at different ways, at different frequencies. Not just any material will work, but it's possible. D asks, if your laptop pad is under the computer on a desk, does it bounce back into your hands and arms, etc.? The answer is yes. And this is important for people to understand. This is how all shielding material works. That includes my laptop pad, which like I have here. I think you guys all can see me on camera. So does that bounce radiation in the other direction towards your hands? The answer is yes. And the principle behind the laptop pad is that it's deflecting the radiation further away, away in the opposite direction from your reproductive organs, which when people are like using it on your lap and so forth. But it does increase the exposure at your hands. Unfortunately, because of how laptops are built, there's no real option for that. So the best protection is to use an external keyboard. Because then you can keep the laptop further away from you. You don't have to worry about shielding under you. You don't have to worry about shielding over because it's further away from you. So using external keyboard and mouse, that get the radiation just further away from your body. That is the best solution. I talk about that in my webinar on laptops. But great question. Thank you, Dee. Kristen asks if someone is allergic to silver. I've not heard about that. I'll have to Google that. One of the reasons we use silver in all of our apparel is, as Kathy pointed out, it does have other benefits like antibacterial, antimicrobial, anti-odor. But it's a lot more expensive than other things that work for shielding. That we don't use it in our phone pouch, for example. Because the phone pouch doesn't come in contact, the shielding material in your phone pouch doesn't come in contact with your skin. So we have more flexibility in terms of what we can use. The key reason we use silver is because it is hypoallergenic. And I was not, but I guess people can, it's possible. I have to do a little bit of research into that. I've never heard of people having an allergic reaction to silver, but it may well be that that's the case. I have to look into it. But definitely many fewer people are allergic to silver than are allergic to other metals that are used in different types of EMF shielding. Thank you. Sarah asks, how do you wash it? That's a great question. I should have pointed that out. So let me just pull up the answer. So it is machine washable. And I just want to pull up the care instructions right here so I don't get any mistakes. Machine wash on cold water, machine wash with cold water on delicate setting, or hand wash with cold water. Air dry only. So you don't want to, it's machine washable, it's not machine dryable. You want to use cold water on the delicate setting or hand wash, and then air dry it. So thank you. That's a great question, Sarah. Thank you. Kristen has a question about earthing. I think, Stephanie, if you want to point her to Kathy's home office webinar, please. You can put the, oh, you just did. Okay. So Kristen asks, if you have an earthing mat under a laptop already, can you do double duty with an EMF protection mat to solve the dirty electricity issue? Stephanie just posted a link in the chat pod to Kathy's webinar from last month. I would encourage you to listen to that. She covered a lot of those issues in some good detail. Thank you. Patricia asks, does the Gator only protect the area it's covering? Yes, all shielding works this way. Well, yes, so all apparel works this way. Let me say that, right? Because like I have here my SYB boxers. When you're wearing them, it only protects the part of your body that it's, the boxers are covering. The same with the Gator, same with the bandana, because it's all shielding material. And so it doesn't like project a magic field and protect your whole body. Unfortunately, if I could create a product that did that, I would do that. So it's a shield and it'll deflect radiation away from the part of your body that it's covering. Now, the reason I say that a little bit different, the apparel specifically, I mean, all shielding works the same way. But if you're carrying your phone in the phone pouch, for example, it's blocking the back of your phone. So it is only shielding that one surface, but it has a protective effect on much more of your body because you're blocking it at the source. So the apparel is really optimized for protecting against EMF that's coming from other sources, and it can really only protect a specific area of your body. But with the electronics accessories, that can have a much bigger impact because you're shielding it at the source. I hope I explained that well. I thought I answered a question. Oh, there, click done. Let's see. Gary asks how to test clothing before and after. Not entirely sure what that refers to, but we do have a video. Now, I want to be clear, I put out testing videos with all of my products. Those really are for demonstration purposes only. In terms of the actual shielding power, I always go back to the lab tests. But I also encourage people to test my products for themselves, so I do the same thing. So I might be able to load a video into this room, but I don't know. This is my first time on Zoom. But if you go to the here, let me go out of presentation mode here. If you go to the Gator page and you see this little video window here, if you click that, that'll load a video which you can play. I hope I don't break my internet by doing this. Okay, I'm breaking something. But anyway, oh, there it is. So you can play the video. This shows you testing the Gator. So you test a phone, and then so you take a test on a phone, and then you take the meter away, and you put the phone in the Gator, and then you test again, and you can see the reduction. So that's how I recommend doing these tests with apparel. Thank you, Gary. Gary asked, why am I not answering your questions? Because I hadn't gotten there yet, Gary. Let's see. I don't know how to say this name. I'm sorry. Rachna asks a good recommendation for wired keyboard and mouse. So a good wired keyboard and mouse. I know Kathy has those. So again, if you wanted to go to that webinar that Stephanie posted the link to in the chat pod, she talks about them there. And Kathy, if you're on the chat still and you wanted to chime in and answer for Rachna for a good wired keyboard and mouse. Thank you. Onika asks, what are the most important places on your body to protect with apparel? That's a really good question. You know, it depends which parts of your body you particularly value. Well, so there's two questions. There's how much do you value that part of your body? And then also how vulnerable is that part of the body to damage? And, you know, on men, well, on all humans, I think the head should be basically number one, right? Because that's where your brain is. That's where your eyes are. Eyes are also quite vulnerable because there's no natural shielding there. That's very delicate material that your eyes are made out of. So the head is really number one. And then on men, number two is the reproductive organs. Now, reproductive organs on women are also important, but they are further in the body. So they have more natural shielding. On men, they are, for lack of a better term, dangling out there and very vulnerable to this type of damage. Now, on women, I would say, you know, if you're pregnant, it's the fetus, right? So, and in fact, when you're pregnant, you probably care more about the fetus than the head. But so on men, it's the head and the reproductive organs. On women, it is the fetus if you have one, and then the head. And then it depends if you're experiencing symptoms in a certain part of your body, you'd want to protect that part of your body. But it's the head, the reproductive organs, and the uterus. Thank you, Annika. So Martina asked if I will offer a coupon today for all the other products on my website. So this webinar, it's really all about the neck gator, but I'm going to type something here into the chat pod, and that is the code is healthy2020, and that works through Christmas Eve on my site to save 15% on any order. So feel free to use that code. It'll work even if you want to buy yourself something, buy your friend something. It'll work multiple times on multiple orders. It doesn't run out until Christmas Eve, and then it does run out. But the big discount today is on the neck gator. Let me get back to my deck here. Let's see. Okay. So Gary says, yeah, how do you stick the meter under the clothing? I think the video I played answered that, Gary, but if it didn't, it may not have played properly through Zoom or whatever. So just go to the site and check it out on the Gator and the bandana. Those are both really good examples of how you can test apparel using an EMF meter. Thank you. Y Quan asks, are there any smog meters out there that can measure 5G? Thank you. Okay, great question. I should have predicted this, and the answer is yes, with a limited yes, but I need to pull up the information off of my computer here. So give me a second. If you download the ebook that I keep telling you about, if you go to shieldyourbody.com/test, okay, I need to jump to the right page here. Where are the meters? Okay, so I'm trying to look for the part of my ebook here. On 5G. Where is it? Okay, I think I skipped it. Hold on. Okay, got it. Okay, here, found it. So these are 3 meters that test up to 8 gigahertz. Now, remember, I had a whole big discussion about frequencies, and 5G can eventually go up to 300 gigahertz, but no current deployments are going anywhere near that. To the best of my knowledge, there are no public deployments that go above 8 gigahertz right now. They are testing, I believe they are testing some applications that are going up to 26 gigahertz now, but those are not in wide deployment. So when you ask, are there meters out there that can measure 5G? In terms of the type of 5G that you would be exposed to today on the, on the street where there's a 5G network, the answer is yes, and it is these. I personally have the Test 593. It is a fantastic meter, but it costs, I see, it's about $400 on Amazon, but it is fantastic. It's a triple axis, which gives you more accuracy in your readings. I've never used the X-Tech. It looks very similar to the tests. I don't know if they're the same or not. I mean, they're different brand names. And then the HFEPE ESI, I'm trying to remember. I think that's one that Kathy likes. Kathy will yell at me if I'm wrong. But I think this is one of the meters that she likes. It doesn't give you specific readings. It just gives you lights. And I'm not a huge fan of that style, but it does save you some money because it's just cheaper to produce. And all three of these go up to 8 gigahertz. That was a great question, Kwan. Thank you. So let's see. Okay. Let's see what this, Neil asks, I operate cameras that have routers on them for video monitoring. What would be your best recommendation for me to use for protection while having a router next to my head? Well, wow. I mean, you want head protection. I mean, I'm trying to think, right? Because if you could shield the Wi-Fi router in some way, so that there's a like if you could put a laptop pad in between the Wi-Fi router where your head is, that is going to be pretty effective. I mean, you're still going to get some exposure, but a massive reduction. Now, I'm trying to understand if that's even possible with the setup that you've done, that you're describing. And it's not entirely clear to me that that is possible. So if not, then a product like my neck gaiter would be, or my bandana would be a good solution for you. Let's see. So Kristen updated me. She has a friend who's allergic to silver. That's interesting. I have to look into that some more. But that, again, silver is generally considered to be a hypoallergenic material. It is specifically the reason why we use silver in our, Kristen, I'd like to know, and you might not know the answer to this, does your friend have the same allergies to copper? And if you can email me that answer. I'd be interested in learning more about your friend's reaction to these materials. Let's see, how are we doing here? The camera is on my shoulder with the router on it. Okay, so if the camera's on your shoulder, so I mean, this using a laptop pad, I mean, I don't know if that's possible, but if like this, but if it is, that would be really quite effective. But if it's not, definitely, the neck gaiter or the bandana. Bandana is a little less expensive, but it doesn't have the same, form-fitting. It also doesn't have as much silver in it. But yeah, I would strongly recommend investing in some headgear, even if it's not mine. That'll be the best way to protect your head. Thank you, Neil. So Renee asks, how do we network among a community of EMF and 5G concerned citizens to strategize on a way forward globally and regionally? There are a lot of groups. One, I can recommend that runs events, has a lot of good information, is the Environmental Health Trusts. I believe that's ehtrust.org. And they, like I say, run a lot of events and they have a lot of good information. And that would be, if I had to pick one right off the top of my head to recommend, that would be a good one. Thank you, Renee. Okay. Let's see. I think I had maybe one or two more questions originally submitted. Oh, let me go back. Sorry, to bring up the coupon code. Okay. What can I say to my friends and family who think 5G is nothing to worry about? So that's why I've made those advocacy materials, because I covered a lot of reasons in this webinar, right, about why 5G is something to worry about. But, you know, knowing those facts and then having a way of expressing them to people so that they listen to you, those are two different things. So that's why I specifically put time this year into creating the advocacy materials. So if you go to shieldyourbody.com/advocacy, that's how I would recommend starting to learn the discussions and how to have those discussions. Thank you, Stephanie, for typing that into the chat. Okay, let's see. Peter asks about a router cage. So I'm not sure what, I mean, I know what a router cage is. I'm not sure if you were asking about them in general, or if maybe you were giving that as advice to Neil. The thing about a router cage, and this is something that everyone needs to keep, some people know this already and it's obvious. Other people don't realize this until I say it, which is you can't fully block this stuff and still have it work. In fact, I was just reading, right before this webinar, I was sharing with Stephanie about an article I was reading online about these people on Amazon who were selling a Wi-Fi router cage, and then the reviews, they were getting bad reviews because the people were saying, but it made my Wi-Fi stop working. And I'm like thinking, yes, it does get, that's exactly what it does. Because if you're blocking the EMF coming off your phone, or if you're really fully blocking the EMF coming off of a Wi-Fi router, then it's not going to work. And that's why, you know, products like my phone pouch are designed to shield in one. It's not, you know, it's only the back of the pouch that's shielded, not the front. Because if you fully shield the phone, it's not going to work. So just put your phone into airplane mode and save all the battery and trouble, and you don't need to buy a pouch. So when these cages, you know, if you put your router in a cage, you're going to end up with the same issue. So, you know, that's why I don't make any products that fully shield electronics, because I feel like that's a waste. If that's what you want to do, turn off the device. Thank you, Peter. Heather asks, how pure is the silver that's used in the Gator? So it's 90% pure silver thread, and then it is 10% spandex. So the product is 90% silver and 10% spandex. I know a lot of my customers prefer when I use all natural materials in my products, and the bandana, for example, is silver and silk. But with a Gator, you needed that kind of stretch, and spandex really was the only viable alternative for that. So, but it's only 10% spandex, the rest is silver. Gary says he missed the first part. Have I talked about Shungite for EMF shielding? No, I did not. I can talk about that real brief. Shungite is not an EMF shielding material, right? So there's different types of EMF protection. Shielding is one type of protection. That's the type that I focus on. All my products are shielding products. And shielding, they work by deflecting radiation in the opposite direction. You can verify that they're working with a meter like this. Now, there's other types of products out there that some claim have protective properties. So just because they're not shielding doesn't mean they're not protecting you. A lot of my customers use Shungite or Orgonite and similar products, and they swear by them. And my answer is always, if it works for you, keep doing it. Definitely don't stop if it's working for you. It's not among the types of products that I recommend to people, because I focus my products and other products that I recommend, I focus on ones that are backed by demonstrable, measurable science. Now, I want to be clear, just because something is not measurable and demonstrable by science does not mean it's not true, does not mean it doesn't work. But in terms of the type of work that I do, in terms of my father's legacy that I work to carry on through SYB, he was all about measuring things. And so, that's so again, my answer is, if it works for you, great. I know people who say it works. There's no way of proving it. in the way that would make me comfortable in terms of recommending it. So that's my answer. Thank you, Gary. Heather says, would the silver possibly have nickel in it? No, the answer is no. You know, I do have products that have nickel in it. The foam pouch, it's inside the pouch, so you don't see it, but the shielding material in here is made with nickel, copper, and cobalt. So I do use nickel, but no, the Gator is 90% silver, not mixed with something else. The bed canopy is 100% silver, not mixed with something else. And the bandana is 65% silver, not mixed with anything else. Thank you. Thank you, Y Kwan. I appreciate that. Okay, so the rate of questions has wound down a bit here. So that's, and we're coming up on 2 hours anyway. And there is one more thing I wanted to say to everyone before winding down. So I'm just going to jump back to the deck. And again, remind everyone that the Neck Gator is on sale because of the feedback I got through the chat pod earlier in the Q&A session. I will leave it up for another hour. So that'll be until 7 p.m. Eastern and 4 p.m. Pacific. So hopefully, you know, if you're interested in the Neck Gator, this is really a good time to do it. If you follow me at all, you know, I don't often do 25% off sales for my products. But I'm very excited about this one, and it's brand new. It's literally today. You're going to be the first people to buy it and to own it. And I think it's a great one. So remember, Neck 25 at checkout. So before signing off, while most of you are still here in the room, I want to take a moment to thank all of you. 2020 has been a really, what's the word? Interesting and rough year for all of us. But it's also been a very significant year for SYB in our history. Just today, you know, with the Neck Gator, we're now up to 18 products. That means the catalog grew 50%. The mailing list quadrupled this year. Traffic to our website has been way up. Obviously, orders are way up. The number of countries we're selling in continues to grow. And that's all happened this year. And that's due entirely to you and to people like you. As you know, much more than other companies in this space, I focus a lot of SYB's work on education. That's videos, that's blog posts, ebooks, emails, and webinars like these. Because I really and strongly believe that education is super important to EMF protection. And people need to understand EMF, what its effects are, and how to protect themselves, and how to use protection products, because they're just not magic bullets. They all do something specifically, and they have to be used in certain ways. And this focus on education, this focus on science, it's part of my father's legacy that I work to carry on through SYB. And the education only works because people like you tune in to join in and to participate. So as we wind down this webinar, the final webinar of 2020, I really want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of the SYB community, for taking the time to participate in our events, and for taking the time to join us and help us build this great community and this very unique type of EMF protection company. So to all of you, under adverse conditions, I wish you all a really wonderful holiday season, and Lord knows a better 2021. Thank you very much. Happy holidays, and have a good night.